raising Christian children.
In a culture with worldviews which once would have been considered inconceivable but are now considered honorable, a small voice cries out in the wilderness. A voice which is unwilling to surrender to the demands or the madness of the woke culture. This voice may be small, and yet it holds great power. Power that cannot be weighed on the scales of a godless culture, but power that will nonetheless stand the test of time, because it is the truth. Welcome, Pilgrims, to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. We are glad you are here with us today, and we are hopeful that you will walk away informed, enriched, and equipped to live as pilgrims in a brave new world.
How we doing, my man?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. A
Good.
little slow on the poll there. I apologize.
No, it's okay. We decided that we're going to open the episodes with hello from now on.
Yeah, that's
Right?
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you remember that because I'm not firing on all cylinders, just so to speak. The fam and I, we made it back home from Boston
Yeah.
just today. Found happily that our house was not ransacked in the process. And so that was good news as well.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried to get here and ransack the house, but
I
I didn't know you'd have somebody here making sure that the house didn't get ransacked.
Well, I'm not entirely sure if it was like a combination of people just not listening to the podcast last week and not knowing that we were going out of town, or if it was my mother-in-law who went ahead and listened to the podcast and then said, oh boy, I better lock the garage door, which we never lock.
Well, you always lock it.
Yes, we always lock the garage door. We never don't lock it is what I meant to say.
Exactly. It's always locked.
And so that was an interesting thing. Even you trying to break into our house just tonight when you came over, had some difficulty doing so.
That's true.
You had to actually use the front door, didn't you?
I had to use the front door.
That is messed up, dude.
I know. I thought that I was family,
Yeah.
but I kind of feel like maybe I'm not anymore. Although we did find out something really cool about your wife's ancestry and my ancestry while you were in Boston.
Yeah. Hit us
So-
up with it. What do we got going on there?
Your wife's, what is it, probably her like 7th great-grandfather or something like that, actually did business with my 7th or 8th great-grandfather.
Yeah.
They both came over on the Mayflower, and they both lived in Duxbury together.
Yep.
And
they pretty much founded Duxbury together.
Yeah, exactly. And they both were they were both trustees of the same parcel of land at one point,
Yeah.
which I think is like the coolest thing because now, we're like close family friends. So,
It's a small world.
well, the new world was very small.
That is true. I mean, I can't trace my ancestry back to the first, colonialists or whatever you want to call them at the time, but it's pretty cool. I mean,
like
it's
my ancestors were actually pilgrims, Jason.
right. And I can only claim to be a pugnacious pilgrim, which while we were in Boston, I proudly wore my hat everywhere I went. And was halfway expecting people to kind of, give me the, okay, I see the pilgrim, what, tell me what we got going on there. But they didn't. I did get called pilgrim several times when I was there, but that's just by reenactments. We did go to the Plymouth colony and, the Mayflower too. And so in character, those folks were treating us as if we were, native to the land.
Yeah.
Or
Did you tell them to call you a pugnacious pilgrim?
I did not. We did make mention that my wife was a descendant of Miles Standish. They asked where we were from, and we told them Minnesota, and they looked very confused about what we were talking about, obviously, because Minnesota, was yet to be founded.
Right.
And I did say, we are actually,
Because, people can't, move or anything like that.
Right.
So.
Well, and I told, to them, it's just, westward expansion hadn't really taken place yet. And so this idea of someone living in the wilderness to the west.
Their roles.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And they did not break out of character.
They were pugnacious posers.
Yeah, pugnacious posers. That's true. But we had a great time in Boston, man. It was
awesome.
a great time. It was long. but we enjoyed it. We pretty much did everything that we set out to do, and I think the kids, the oldest of our kids were 13, 15, and I think they really could kind of understand the concepts. I think some of the younger kids, the next group, there's an 11-year-old, and then my second oldest, who is 8, and her counterpart, who is also 8. I don't think they really got it, so we got a lot of, like, why are we walking around Boston? This is boring. I don't want to go see another historical monument. They were more thrilled about the swimming pool at the hotel.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I do hope that, hopefully they were able to at least embrace it so that when they are old enough, they can have some memories of, hey, I actually have been there.
Yeah, you planted the seed.
Yeah. So we did I think my wife and, the other gal who I don't know if, I'm going to go ahead and say it, Sue Ellen, who was there. They're the homeschooler teachers. They do a great job. And I think they really tried to bring it to life because we'd go and see this stuff during the day, whether it's the Boston Massacre site or the Boston Tea Party site or Bunker Hill or, the Pilgrim, the Mayflower 2. And then we'd come home and watch, the story of us, which was, I think, the History Channel's documentary or somebody did it. And it was really well done. And they tried to bring it to life. Like, hey, that when we heard about the Battle of Lexington, when we heard about, the Midnight Ride, like this is what it's about. And I think that aspect was cool. The kids didn't really get it until we watched National Treasure last night with Nicolas Cage. That's really when the story came to life with this fictitious fake idea that had, tie-ins to some real things that went on or whatever.
Sure.
But it was fun. It really was.
It's good to hear. And was it educational? It
was educational. It education brought to life. We went and saw the Constitution as well, which was really cool to walk on that ship and, to be able to say this ship has been through, wars, the War of 1812 and, just.
When was that?
The War of 1812?
Yeah.
I think it was in the 50s or something, like 1950.
Just I wasn't alive, so it's irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, I did see on Dave Louder with Crowder one time, I think some people on the boardwalk, Venice Beach or whatever, they were saying, I think in the 1950s or something like that. And
it's a tough one. I mean, how are we expected to know when the War of 1812
I mean,
was?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially if you weren't alive.
Right.
And some people actually thought they were alive during the War of 1812, which was even more amazing.
My favorite is when there are questions about what was the war called that gave America its independence? And they'll be like, the Civil War. It's no. Sorry.
Who was America's first president?
Yeah.
Richard Nixon? Is that right?
Bill Clinton.
Yeah. And who did we fight in the Civil War? Was it the Russians?
Iraq.
Oh, Iraq. Yeah. Well, welcome, Pilgrims, to the podcast. We're happy to have you here. If you didn't know, we did actually go to Boston, the family and I, for a homeschool trip, and so that's kind of what we're talking about, which was the reason that we had a stream on a Tuesday last week instead of our normal Thursday, and the reason we're live streaming on Tuesday this week. We're back into the normal flux of things, which is what? I mean,
that I'm going out of town.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
In my defense, I'm not going out of town with Derek this time. I'm going out of town with his dad, and Derek's not coming.
Yeah, Derek was uninvited. Not uninvited. It's too close to baby time.
Yeah, he's expecting a kid any day now.
Yeah.
So instead of Derek going up to the cabin to close it down for the winter, I got tagged.
Next man up.
I also get to go grouse hunting and duck hunting for the first time in my life.
This trip while you're there?
Trip, yep. So we're going, after we close up the cabin, we're going out to the hunting shack.
Nice.
Which is miles out into the woods. You can only get there via four-wheeler. It's way out there.
You can only get there by unregistered four-wheeler, right? Is from what I hear.
Unregistered four-wheeler?
Yeah. The four-wheeler's not registered. Isn't that what we learned a while back? It was Derek's dad, and then it was his.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
the tabs were expired. Okay. Yeah.
But they're not anymore?
They're not anymore.
Oh, bummer. Okay.
Although, I mean, you're so far out into the wilderness.
No one's
that like the DNR is not going out there.
Okay.
Most of the time, I've heard. They will wait for you to come back. But
to make sure
when you're
tags.
out there, it's kind of like, every man for himself.
Oh,
like
cool.
Derek was even telling me at one point, a crazed lunatic was going through the woods and like burning everybody's cabins down.
Whoa.
And their hunting shack was so hard to get to that it was one of the only ones that wasn't burned down. And when everybody rebuilt, they had to build smaller shacks because the regulations had changed.
Oh no! So they're grandfathered in with this bigger shack, and that's pretty cool.
So they're pretty It's not Derek's family's hunting shack, but it's like a family friend. But I'm just excited to be able to go because I don't think Derek would have ever brought me to the hunting shack. That seems like it's like sacred ground for him. So I'm just happy his dad's bringing me.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, if Derek won't, at least his old man will. So that's cool.
Yeah. Lee and I are pretty tight,
Well, yeah,
I'm like
you
his
will
second
be.
son, kind of.
I mean, if you work hard enough this weekend, I mean, because
he knows I
Derek's
work.
going to be I'm not work, but I mean, just solidifying that relationship, you might be able to roll into that because Derek's going to be a busy man, here pretty soon. He's going to have a baby, and the dynamics are going to change, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm definitely more reliable than Derek, just in the sense that I'm not having a kid right now. So since Derek is having a kid, he is therefore more distracted.
Right, and I think, it's going to be hurtful when Derek hears Lee tell you that you're like the son he never had.
Right, exactly.
Especially when he actually had a son. But,
yeah.
All's fair in love and in war, really, so.
Yes.
And speaking of love and war, back to Boston, for me personally, like, it was educational, and I always learned something that I didn't know, and that's part of the reason that I like going to places like that to have that kind of rich history is that there's always something new to learn. And really, I think the last time I went with Anna, and it was more like a birthday present for her, and we tried to do the Freedom Trail then too, and we picked up a lot of the same information. But I think this time, especially in the context of like America and freedom kind of in turmoil, like we went, I think we went almost 10 years ago now, and it was a different world back then. I think we were, obviously halfway into the war in Afghanistan, but for the most part, like
Obama was president.
Life was good. Prosperity was high. There wasn't a lot of civil unrest, if you will, because everybody was happy. Life was good.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, exactly. The Kool-Aid had been drunk and people were drinking it and happy that they had drunk it or whatever, however you would say that, right? George Bush wasn't president anymore. You know what I mean? So freedom was at an all-time high back then. But now, just in the context of, basically in the aftermath of Donald Trump burning our nation to the ground over the past 4 years.
Very strong and accurate choice of words.
Well, I'll rephrase that. Because Donald Trump was president, our country burned to the ground. I don't really think it was, I don't think he was at fault, but fire started under his presidency.
It's inarguable.
It just gave freedom a whole new meaning, I think. Yeah. And then now in the aftermath of really questionable fairness, due process in elections, and I understand Arizona, found that more votes actually went Biden's way than thought, and that's what the news wants us to understand. They don't really want to talk about all the other stuff that was discovered by by the ninjas, because that's irrelevant. What matters most is that not only was President Biden the most popular elected president in the history of America, but he actually was even more popular than we thought because they found some more votes that went his way.
Right. He was so popular that there were people voting for him 2 or 3 times.
Multiple times. Yeah, exactly. and people out of state in Arizona love Arizona and President Biden so much that they actually voted for him even though they don't even live there anymore.
Right.
So that just goes to show you how much people like President Biden.
And how much they didn't like Donald Trump.
Yes, exactly. And that might be more of it, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that people really like President Biden, but they actually hate Donald Trump. And so all that to say, it it just brought a lot of this stuff to life for me in a way that did not happen last time.
Sure.
And so when you hear kind of the anger and the just frustration of people when they feel like they don't have representation and yet have to live by the tyranny of their leadership, you could kind of understand just the powder keg that was burning. And so the first place that we actually ended up going to see was the Boston Tea Party. And I hadn't done that when Anna and I went out there 10 years ago, and it was pretty interesting, just the parallels that were going on back then compared to what we're actually experiencing now. Obviously in a different context because that was under English rule, and we're under a different king here in America. But it brought to life some quotes from Sam Adams, which actually is more than just a beer. So I found that out this time too.
I was going to make that comment.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you just made it.
Yeah,
so
but it's probably going to be funnier.
I just wanted you to know that you stole my thunder.
Well,
that's all. It was just pure jealousy.
We can edit that out, Mike. Why do you want to go ahead and say your joke?
Keep it in.
Okay.
I want people to know how
wrong
tyrannical you are.
Well, why don't you read that first quote for us from Sam Adams?
It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. Man, yeah. That made me feel all tingly.
Yeah, and it's probably not the bourbon.
I was going to say that too.
Oh, man.
At least we're on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like our ESP's working tonight.
ESPN,
yeah, ESPN.
But yeah, oh, man, I was just talking. So we had Dan on the show as a guest a few weeks ago. He and I were just talking today about this exact concept of, the minority usually doesn't the minority usually doesn't prevail by brute force, but the minority can shift the narrative enough that meaningful change ends up happening. And usually it is the minority that enacts that meaningful change because the majority is too busy clinging on to what feels comfortable.
Exactly, yeah. Too busy being cowards and just embracing whatever comes their way, right? And I think that was kind of what was exposed even in the Boston Tea Party is that, people were coming. They were legitimately angry. Many of them had lived through other various taxes that basically crippled their ability to provide for their family and gain prosperity, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really what it was about is that, a lot of times it was, to pay the king, right? Like this was just going to pay the king. It didn't serve any other purpose than making sure that the plebs stayed in their place, right?
Right.
And America, out of the gate, of course, before it was even America, it was a land of plenty, and people came here and they saw that if we work hard, we can make a life for ourselves that we never would have been able to do in England because we were in a different class. Like that class we were never able to break above our class that we were born into, right? Whereas America, from the very beginning, before it even existed as a country, there was this concept that, dude, come here and find life, find liberty, find happiness, live into the American dream, and you'll be able to make a name for yourself regardless who you are or regardless what royalty or bloodline you come from.
Yep.
And that was really cool for me to kind of see that these people who had poured their heart and soul into it, they were angry for no other reason than, look, we're not asking for something free here. We're not asking for a handout. We're not asking for the king to give us something that we haven't earned ourselves. We're just asking for us to be able to have what we have created ourselves.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, that's what people are fighting for even today, right? Like,
yes.
Like, leave us alone. Like, let us live our lives. Let us do what we, what God has allowed us to do, what God has given us, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. These things are given to us by God, not government. Like, we don't need to ask the government permission to be free. Like, God makes us free.
And that's what I feel like people are losing sight of, is that these principles are timeless. Donald Trump didn't just show up in 2016 and all of a sudden a bunch of Americans started believing the way that they believe. I mean, Americans have always had this sense of like liberty and freedom like ingrained into them from an early age. Like this is why the Pledge of Allegiance was such a big thing. Like we weren't just blindly pledging allegiance to the flag. This was a passed down tradition in respect of our forefathers that were attempting to create a country, like an experiment where people could actually have freedom to do what they were doing. And I truthfully believe that our founding fathers are like rolling over in their graves right now with how powerful the government has become,
right,
and so above any sort of criticism the government has become, and how untouchable the government has become.
Right.
I mean,
with the help of the people. I wonder how much, to me, it's like, dude, I think, the old adage, like, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? But how many people are just enjoying the status quo because it doesn't affect their life, or it lines up with what they've been told for so long that they think it's right, without even acknowledging or taking time to think about, like, what are people really angry about here, right? Is it really just about the fact that someone other than Donald Trump won the election? No. I mean, why did Donald Trump win the election in the first place? It certainly wasn't because of his character, right? It was because of he understood, he had his finger on the pulse of a nation who had lived under, President Obama for 8 years and seen how much of their liberty had been removed from them, and how, the kind of direction that our country was being taken in, right? Mm-hmm. And so, whether you believe in that anger or not, the question becomes, can you sympathize and empathize enough with people that are angry to understand truly what they're angry about, and not just assume it's because they're racist or, fascist or whatever other buzzwords get tossed out. And for me to see guys like Samuel Adams come out, and even his brother, right? His brother, John Adams, who obviously was our president, with the Boston Massacre, there were Americans, colonialists or whatever, that were killed, right? And instead of, the mob wanted to just find these soldiers and kill them, right? They mm-hmm. arrested these soldiers for shooting these men, and the mob wanted to kill them. And he said, no. Here, that's not how we do it. Like, these people will be awarded a fair and free trial, and that's an American concept that we don't see play out, right? Like the mob rule, the cancel culture, all these things, right? They want blood, they want their pound of flesh, and yet we live in a system supposedly where we don't let the mob decide what is good. We don't let the mob decide what is right, what is true. We supposedly award every man the freedom of a fair and free trial, and that's not what we see even in our culture and world today.
Yeah, and we see a lot of hypocrisy, right, where they say that the system's not fair because the system turns out a lot of minority criminals, and it never crosses their mind that maybe minorities commit more crimes. It has to be a systemic issue with the justice system, right? And then at the same time, they'll say that the justice system is not fair when a white person is like, he gets off after a trial or something like that. Like, let's say in a police shooting, right? Like the guy it'll be shown that like his actions were justified, and the mob will just be like, well, because he's a white guy and he's a police officer, he must be guilty, and clearly there's corruption and racism in the system.
Yep.
When in reality, justice is blind.
It's supposed to be, and you look at Lady Justice, and she has a blindfold on purpose, right? Yeah. She has the scales, but she's blindfolded. She's not judging it based on class. She's not judging it based on, anything supposedly but the evidence.
And I would say that it's very likely that most people who obtain the position of being a judge have gotten there because of their demonstrated ability to remain impartial.
Right.
And to impartially apply the law of the Bill of Rights, like state laws, stuff like that. Usually judges are very, very, very by the book. Yeah. And that's on purpose, because if they're found to not be by the book, they lose their livelihood.
Right, exactly.
Or they could be committing a crime by not being impartial.
Right,
So,
and I think, it's interesting because I think today, I don't know if I saw it on Drudge or whatever, but there was like 100 plus, federal judges who had been found to have wrongfully judged in cases where they had a direct financial tie to,
wow,
and
bring
so
them down.
Well, and you just see that there is corruption, right? It's hard, so it's no doubt that, and I'm sure in some ways, right, like, some of it probably is naive, right? Ignorance, like, oh, I guess I do have stock in this company or this, whatever that I didn't even think about, right? And so in some ways, we're such an integrated world that I'm sure some of that happens without judges even knowing it, but not always, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the justice in a world that is corrupt can only promise so much, right? Because we're also men and women of very corrupt character, and
Which is why it's important that we cling to the convictions provided by the Word of God and the law that God has put on our hearts and the law that God has provided in Scripture.
Absolutely.
So, before we go down this path too far, I just want to say we have a couple more quotes from Samuel Adams that I think we need to go over just because.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. You mind if I just read the next one?
Yeah, I think you should.
I love this topic, by the way.
Yeah, that's good. This was not our topic. We decided to do something different, and I just think because of timing and everything else. So go for it.
So this next quote from Samuel Adams says, "The liberties of our country, the freedom of our civil constitution, are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks." I agree. I agree. What's tough for me as a Christian is to understand where the line is between defending the country and defending God's word. We've definitely seen our country's constitution and the Bill of Rights and a lot of our founding documents completely ripped to pieces by the subjectivity of lawyers.
Yep.
Right? So I think that needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about where our loyalties lie today because of how the legal system has kind of destroyed the heart of some of our founding documents.
Yeah.
But I think it still reigns true that that we do need to defend our liberties. We do need to defend our freedoms. We do need to defend against all the hazards and against all attacks. So.
Right, and it's, I think that's the thing that, when we talk about a Christian worldview, right, and even, a lot of the material that we cover from today's current events, right, it's trying to get people to understand, like, of course we have our own opinions, we have our own perceptions, we have our own ideas of what is good, bad, right, wrong. But at the end of the day, I think what would make you and I happy, Mike, is not that people would just hook, line, and sinker buy everything that we're selling, right? It's just that they would be aware, aware enough to understand, right? Is it a problem that your government is mandating that people put something into their body in order to make a living and, and put food on the table of their families, right? Like, is that a problem? Yeah. Regardless how you feel about the vaccine, the reason that's a problem is that it is a hazard, to the Constitution. It is a hazard to our freedom. That's a hazard, right? And to his point, like, liberties of our country, the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards. That is a hazard. Even if the vaccine is good, the ends are not justified by the means that it took to get there, right?
Well, it's just like the gun control debate, right?
Right.
Would it be a good thing if we got guns out of every criminal's hand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's
100%.
arguing that.
Yeah, but if the way that we have to go about that is by disarming the entire population, that's bad.
And let me tell you why it's bad.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, Australia did that very thing. And look at where they're at right now.
Right.
And we say that could never happen in America. That could have not happened in Australia. There's no way. Like, the Aussies are even more, crazy than us, right? And yet look at what's happened in Australia. If you wander too far away from your home, you are literally being arrested. It is ridiculous. And one of our lines of defense as Americans is the fact that we have guns in our closet or in the deepest part of whatever lake we were accidentally fishing on and dropped them, wherever they are, right? Mine are gone too. They have been.
Yep.
And it was a horrible tragedy.
Horrible, awful tragedy.
Yeah.
We were actually together.
We were, yeah,
yep.
that's
and
right.
We both lost all of our firearms.
Right.
At the bottom. I can't even remember what lake it was.
I don't either, but I know it was super deep.
It was actually at one point a mine.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah. So it's hundreds of feet deep.
Yeah, hundreds.
Yeah, I don't even know.
And I think toxic.
Definitely toxic. Yeah, there was some toxic runoff in there too. We actually couldn't find any fish.
It was a horrible idea to fish there, but we did.
It was, yeah. We swam too.
Yeah.
Which
the rest is history.
Exactly. Anyway, why don't you go on with the last quote that we have from Samuel Adams?
The last quote we have is, "The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule." And I love that. What is the law of nature? I mean, we can call it the law of nature, but what is the law of nature, right? That's God's law in our heart, is it not?
Yeah, he was being intentionally diplomatic with the way that he said that, and intentionally vague. I guess I don't really know Samuel Adams' theology, but I can get behind what he's trying to say here. I would have preferred if he said it a little bit more God-centered, right? But it is definitely a good point. I mean, I do believe that our natural liberty is to be free from any superior power on earth. I would say any superior human power on earth.
I do think that
we should belong to no man, right?
Right. And I don't know this to be exact, but this whole concept of natural law, right? I believe comes from the idea of there being a law, right?
Yeah, they were deists,
right? And
100%.
the Bible certainly explains it as, God's law is written on the heart of every man, right?
Yeah.
And so you think about that, and even the 10 Commandments, right? I mean, you would be very hard pressed to find a person that would argue against that. Maybe Bill Clinton, with the whole idea of adultery, but
well, a lot of people would argue against a few of the first ones that are regarding, loving God, not using his name in vain.
Yeah.
But the moral commandments,
right?
Most people would not argue against them.
Yep.
Even subjective moralists,
right? Exactly,
wouldn't argue against them.
Right, and that's why they would say the Bible does not have a monopoly on law,
right?
But really, it does because that law was created from somewhere, right? It's not subjective, right? And that's what's proven when you go line by line.
We just evolved to know that that's the best chance our species has
for survival.
Yeah,
right.
It just. It's very scientific, Jason. You wouldn't understand.
The conscience is very scientific, Mike.
It is very scientific.
I mean, science has really given us a fair explanation for why man has a conscience, which I really appreciate, because otherwise we wouldn't really know why man even cares.
Yeah. Do you really appreciate it, though? I mean, are you capable of understanding and appreciating it?
Probably not as a white male Christian. Not as well as
I wouldn't
others.
expect you to understand. Yeah.
But I love the fact that the two things are being said here. Again, I don't want to speak out of place and ascribe things to Samuel Adams that aren't his. I know his brother was a very religious man. I don't know much about Samuel Adams' religion. I think they were Anglican, but Anglican. What'd I say? I said Anglican. I don't know what that even means, but yes, they were Anglican. But the fact that he calls out, right, that we should be free from any superior power on earth, right? That is telling us that if we are submissive to anyone, it should not be to another man under earth. Although the Bible clearly tells us to submit to those who God has placed in authority over us, but again, not to the point of giving up our freedoms, right? To the point of giving our liberties up, right?
Think about this, though. Like the early founding fathers were they were placed into a position of power almost begrudgingly.
Right.
And they understood the responsibility that they were undertaking, and they understood that they needed to govern by a constitution instead of by their own ideas and their own like moral justifications.
Yes.
That's why they got together and wrote a Bill of Rights. They wrote a constitution that made sure to preserve freedoms and liberties instead of just ruling with an iron fist. These were leaders that understood that their leadership needed to be kept in check at all costs, regardless of whether or not they wanted more or less leadership.
Power, more power,
more power.
Right. And that is so cool. Like even, and again, like, I don't know how much of this is folklore and how much of it is actually true, but supposedly when George Washington was elected as the first president or whatever, they wanted to establish him as a king because that's all they knew, right? And he said, no way, like that's not how we're going to do this thing.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to trade one king for another. Like, we have to have a system that allows the people to have the power. We're going to place the power into the hands of the people versus, something different.
It reminds me of when the Israelites
of course,
demanded that they needed a king,
right? Like,
and
God, you can be our God, you can be our protector, our provider, and everything else, but we want a king.
Yeah, it's just like people,
Right.
It's just like people, and what's it going to take but somebody who, I don't know, somebody who points that authority toward God. Like the thing that blows my mind is like in the Declaration of Independence when they're actually talking about like the rights were given to us by the Creator. Like they were, in my opinion, doing whatever they could to try and like people would point to them as an authority and they'd say, whoa, don't point at me. Like here's where you should be pointing.
Right.
And that's good.
Yes, very.
That's good.
And it's humble and it's actually very respectable because these are men who, the world was offered to them, right? Like, and they would have been the biggest heroes of that time, and yet they still understood, like, don't trust us.
Yeah.
Like power goes to people's heads. Power corrupts people, and these are men that wanted something bigger than themselves, right? They understood the joy, the freedom, the peace, the prosperity that came when all eyes weren't on them as being the heroes, right?
Right.
And again, like we're not trying to oversell who our forefathers were. They
were not perfect men.
No, and not only that, but obviously they weren't walking out the life of Puritans.
Right.
All of them.
Some of them weren't even like good men.
Right. I mean, no.
But they did the right thing.
Yes, exactly. They knew that our goodness did not come from intrinsic places within our hearts.
Right.
And so, I mean, in that regard, you sit here and think about the American experience and how it was birthed and how they sold this thing to the people, right? It took persuasion. There were many people who weren't on board with, going to war against England. They saw it as a losing cause. And even Boston, right? Like the thing that probably opened my eyes the most is, you sit here and you think like, hey, I know what happened with the Revolutionary War and we understand where it started, right? And Lexington and all these battles, right? But at the same point, when the tea was dumped into the harbor, right? Millions of dollars, in today's, worth or whatever, like Boston was shut down. Like the king's next move was to literally just block the harbor and not allow any trade. And it cost those people a great deal. It cost them their livelihood. It cost them their freedom. It cost them their prosperity. It cost them, being prosperous versus being in poverty, right? Like that legitimately happened. And they understood that, and they kept reiterating this, like they knew what was on the line, right? If enough people, if this thing went south and enough people didn't jump on board, like people were going to hang, right? But they knew all that was on the line, and yet their freedom was worth more to them.
It's a tale as old as time, really.
Yeah.
I mean, people doing the right thing regardless of the fear of up to death
repercussions. Yeah.
I mean, you look at the early apostles, right? They had every reason They had every reason to like disown Jesus, right? And to turn away and to say that it was all mumbo jumbo and hocus pocus. Instead, they clung to their convictions until they were killed.
Yep.
You know,
for sure.
And I'm not saying that like every conviction that you cling to is worth doing that, but I certainly think that like liberty and freedom are worthy of being preserved.
Right.
I mean, that's a hill that I think is
worth dying on. And it's not the first time in America's history, you know. And I think that that's what, you know, really when we were trying to teach our kids, like, look, we're not trying to equate things, right? Because it's not apples to apples comparison right now. But what is your freedom worth to you? And that, you know, what is your peace of mind worth to you? There were people that were loyal to the kingdom simply because they liked the prosperity that they had, right?
Yep.
And they understood, like, it's unfair for us to be taxed like this. It's unfair for us just because this tea is coming off this ship that somehow we have to pay royalties to the king. It was unfair for us to have to pay to, you know, for stamps and all this kind of stuff, right? It just didn't make sense, right? But they weren't going to rock the boat. They were happy. They were comfortable, if you will, and there are a
lot of people like that nowadays,
and there absolutely are.
There were back then, there are today.
Yep, absolutely. And so, you know, that's what we try to get our kids to understand is like, look, it took brave men and women. It took men and women of great conviction. It took men and women who understood that the consequences of their right decision were going to cost them something, to birth something beautiful out of the chaos that was initiated during, you know, those first couple choices of the revolution. And you know, of course, we're not necessarily calling people to a revolution. I think that what we have, at least at this point in time, is a history to look back on and say, no, this is what America was founded on. Will it come to a point where we have to revolt? Will it come to a point where we have to disobey? Will it come to a point where we have to resist?
I think it's happening.
It is happening.
It is happening.
In subtle ways, for sure.
Even in not so subtle ways. I mean, I remember whenever Donald Trump would give a speech, you would get like negative comments on it, like his live streams and stuff like that from like CNN and NBC and Fox and stuff like that on YouTube. But it wouldn't be all negative. It'd be kind of like interspersed with like some people saying like, God bless America, you know, some people saying make America great again, some people saying God bless Donald Trump, and then other people saying like this guy's a loser and stuff like that.
Right.
When Biden goes and makes a speech right now, you have to search for a positive comment. You have to search, right? People are starting to turn. And even in Australia right now, this is not like just an America thing.
Yeah.
In Australia, people are physically fighting the police and the military police out there. This whole thing with the pandemic, with all of the regulations, with all of the government overreach, people have gotten to the breaking point, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think we're only going to see the natural consequence of that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree at all. I think what people are being forced to ask, you know, and some of them it's you know, desperation, right? Like they have lost everything. Some people have, and others, you know, it's, you know, like myself included, right? Like my job was very easily shifted to an at-home experience, and I didn't skip a beat on that front.
Right.
But I'm not naive to the reality that some people lost it all. Some businesses were forced to close down. Even in Boston, like one of the things I was looking forward to is right on School Street, which is where the first public school in America was actually established. It's now a Ruth Chris Steakhouse, so that there's nothing more American than that reality. But you know, there was this little cupcake shop that I took onto 2 times when we were down there, and it was just called Sweet. And we went there, and there was a sign right in the window that just said, you know, to all our loyal customers over the last, you know, however many years, thank you. Unfortunately, we were not able to sustain during this last year, and so they shut down the shop, and it was just sad to see. And that's one of very many small businesses that just simply couldn't make it, right? And so those people are out of work.
And it's not just the small businesses. I mean, think about this perspective here. And I understand that this is anecdotal. I understand that this is a very specific what-if scenario. But this is happening to a lot of people. Imagine going to school for 4 to 8 years, right? to become involved in the healthcare industry. Okay? You have, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have your career taken away from you
Yeah.
because you've chosen not to get the vaccine.
Right.
Your debt doesn't go away.
No.
Now
Uncle
your
Sammy's
career
coming
that you've
for his, yeah.
now that you have fought, you've done everything in your life has led up to you choosing this career path. Now you have that taken away from you. You still have to pay your debt with no way to make money anymore with your chosen career path. And now on top of that, the government that took that job away from you is now bragging about how many jobs are being created.
Right. Yeah.
They're pushing you down, walking all over you, and making an example of you, and you just have to sit there and, I guess, deal with it, comply, fall in line. No, people are being broken by this.
Right.
People are not going to continue laying down and letting this happen to them.
Right. And you're forcing people's hands, and in some ways you wonder, like, is that part of the plot? Is that part of the plan? Like, what when you think about this idea or concept of a great reset, like, what's it going to take, right? Is it going to take people revolting and the government coming in to save the day? I certainly think they think, there are those that think that that's, the method.
Hey, the Reichstag was pretty effective.
Right. It certainly was. Yeah. What is amazing to me is you look at even what happened on Capitol Hill today, right, where these generals are being called to the carpet to explain what the heck happened in Afghanistan. How did that go down, right? And we've been told, and even the Biden administration officially has come out and said, look, nobody disagreed with us. Everybody said that the right thing for us to do was to pull out of there, right? And yet now that the generals have the microphone and are given a chance to explain themselves, they're not falling on the sword, right?
Right.
And so many of them actually today, there was a story that came out from Politico that said the top generals contradict Biden and say that they did urge him not to withdraw from Afghanistan. And again, like, a government that can't be trusted is a government that can't tell us the truth. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is coming from Politico, but top generals told lawmakers under oath on Tuesday that they advised President Joe Biden early this year to keep several thousand troops in Afghanistan, directly contradicting the president's comments in August that no one warned him not to withdraw troops from the country. We have an audio clip that we want to play here, and we have titled it Generally Speaking, just simply because there's a couple generals speaking here and telling us what is believed to be the truth. And so we'll play that now, and then we'll circle back for some comment.
Did you agree to the recommendation that General Miller had 2 weeks ago?
Senator, again, I won't share my personal recommendation to the president, but I will give you my honest opinion, and my honest opinion and view shaped my recommendation. I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, and I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
Yes, so I understand that. And General Milley, I assume you agree with that in terms of the recommendation of 2,500?
What I said in my opening statement and the memoranda that I wrote back in the fall of 2020 remained consistent, and I do agree with that.
This committee is unsure as to whether or not General Miller's recommendation ever got to the president. Obviously, there are conversations with the president, but I would like to ask, even though General McKenzie, I think you've all made this statement, did you talk to the president about General Miller's recommendation?
Sir, I was present when that discussion occurred,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm confident that the president heard all the recommendations and listened to them very thoughtfully.
That's pretty clear without throwing Biden under the bus, specifically, that he was aware of the recommendations from his top military advisors and officers. And
yeah, he's going to have to play cleanup now, or he's just going to ignore it and pretend like that didn't just get said under oath.
Right, exactly. And, this all stems back to, August 19th in his interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, in which President Biden said that no one that he can recall advised him to keep a force of about 2,500 troops in Afghanistan.
He's got a secret weapon here.
His age,
his
or what?
recollection ability,
Yeah,
his
exactly.
ability to recall things.
During the interview, Stephanopoulos asked Biden point blank, "So no one told you, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that." And Biden answered, quote, no one said that to me that I can recall.
That I can recall, right? So that's a legal out that he gave himself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I hate playing this game, like the what if game.
Yeah.
But it's so hard for me not to believe that if this was Donald Trump saying this exact same thing, the media would hang him out to dry.
Oh, for sure.
They would say he's a liar. They would say that he intentionally schemed. They would throw out all kinds of accusations that Biden just isn't receiving.
Right.
From the mainstream media.
He undermined his general's recommendation because he's a tyrant and doesn't even listen to the professionals.
And that's why people like me, people like us kind of, like, we see through it. And, you know, I've gotten into arguments with people where they're like, you're not the majority. You're not the majority. I'm like, go on any media platform right now and look at the comment section of anything Biden does. I don't care if it's CNN, NBC, whatever news outlet you want to go to. Watch a clip of a Biden speech and go into the comment section.
Yeah.
The majority, the great, vast majority, is people who are upset with his leadership ability, upset with the way that he has approached this presidency, and upset with the way he's leading the country on both sides of the aisle.
Right, and
it's hard for me to believe that we're a minority at this point.
And even if we are a minority, I think what I love so much about the Samuel Adams quote that you first referenced is that it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you're the minority, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom is what this country needs. And exposing the truth, right? So for 4 years under Donald Trump, and again, like, I'm not here to tell you that Donald Trump is the most honest man. In fact, I don't even have a problem saying he probably is one of the most dishonest men that I've ever seen, right? Like, I have no problem with that, right? Like, he said whatever he needed.
You have no problem with saying that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't have any evidence. All I know is that even if he was telling the truth, we were being told that he was a liar. Even if he did speak out against white supremacy, all we were being told is that he said there are good people on both sides, right? Like, there was so much against him that I can't sit here and vouch for the guy, and I never would, right? But at the same point in time, I can see the double standard in how he was treated versus how President Biden is treated with these kid gloves, and he is bold-faced lying. Saying that no one ever recommended. Like, we were totally caught off guard. I can't understand. And yet we have generals here that were calling the shots, advising the president of the United States. And yet he's saying, well, to my recollection, I don't think anyone ever told me this wasn't a great idea.
And a lot of people are they're not buying it anymore.
Right. Which is important.
Yeah.
It's important. So even if it's the minority that's raising, the flag or not, like, someone is. And we ought to pay attention. Right? Like, people need to be paying attention.
I agree.
And so those that are paying attention really are the ones that are saying, look, what's done is done, right? But there needs to be accountability for this at least, right? And the problem is that those who are calling for accountability are schmucks like you and me who are plebs, right? Like, no one's going to listen to our voice, right? Are they? Right? I mean, maybe our pilgrims are listening.
Yeah,
to
they
what
don't
we
really
say,
have a lot of reason to.
Which we appreciate, right?
Yeah.
But then you got guys that legitimately have a case to be made, like Lieutenant Colonel Scheller. And where is he today, Mike?
In military jail.
For doing what?
For asking for accountability.
Right. And of course, he knew what was on the line. Again, right? He knew that it was going to cost him something. Even going back to that first video that went viral, he said, this could cost me my command. This could cost me my rank. This could cost me my livelihood. But at a certain point in time, as a man of integrity, I've been told that what I need to be is accountable for the choices that I make.
Mm-hmm.
And all I'm asking for from those who I answer to is that they would hold themselves to that same standard. And it got him jail. And not only did it get him jail time, but he also had to go through psych evaluation as maybe the out where they could say, oh, look, he's just crazy. You know, he's just really got some emotions going on that he doesn't know how to handle. But because he, like, in the midst of all that said, okay, I ran through your gauntlet of all the things that you did to try and, you know, save face. And at the end of all that, I'm still angry. I'm still mad. I still demand answers.
This can't be good for morale in the military.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, those that I know that are still in, they are angry.
Yeah.
Partially because, you know, for 20 plus years, they were being lied to and told that this was actually making a difference and that we were working towards freedom in Afghanistan when really the powers that be knew they were just playing silly war games over there and making tons of money along the way, right?
Right.
Like they knew that there was no exit plan that was going to be victorious for the United States. And yet we stayed there for 20 years. So I'm not here to vouch for a 20-year war that took place in Afghanistan.
Right.
But the deceit, the lies, the deception, the lack of leadership that allowed that to go on as long as it did. And now on the back end where our leaders and the commander-in-chief are saying, well, look, we had no idea that it was going to end the way that it did. Yes, you did. You had every indication that this was going to be a cluster on the way out of here, and yet you still walked us towards it without any real strategy on a clean exit. And many people, 12 at least, Americans military lost their lives because of it.
Yep.
And countless of others, you know, now who will hang in the streets of Kabul and all these other locations because America bailed on our mission and our allies.
Yeah.
We have a clip of someone calling for the immediate release of Lieutenant Colonel Scheller, and then we'll circle back and converse on that as well.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller is an American patriot who dared to speak the truth. He knew that a 4-minute, 45-second video could bring his storied 17-year career in the United States Marine Corps to a screeching halt, but he did not care. He laid it all down and spoke truth to power. He said what every other service member knew in their heart was true. The incompetence of the Biden White House cost American lives. Their sin was unpardonable and deadly. Lieutenant Colonel Scheller called them out, but they couldn't handle the criticism. He was ordered to undergo mental health screenings because he stood up to incompetence. Today, right now, this very second, he sits behind bars in my home state of North Carolina, shackled in a military brig, while those who orchestrated Biden's incompetent Afghanistan withdrawal walk free. Mr. Speaker, this is a stain on our nation's conscience. Lieutenant Stuart Scheller must be released. With that, I yield back.
Thoughts?
Didn't mince words. Yeah, I think he should be released. I think it is, I mean, it's Orwellian, right? It's like, hey, you didn't fall in line. Even though what he's saying is totally right and actually like morally upstanding, he's being punished for it by jail. Like, these are not the things that the people who are serving in the military took an oath to defend. You know what I mean? Like, if I would venture to guess that if a lot of the people who are serving in the military today knew that they would be jailed for standing up for integrity, they likely wouldn't feel comfortable serving that country. That would punish them for standing up for what's true.
For doing the right thing.
And for doing the right thing.
Right.
We've always, as Americans, held ourselves up to the standard of being the country that tries to do the right thing. We've failed in a lot of ways, but we've tried to hold on to integrity.
Yeah, and I think
now we're not even trying to anymore.
And we're getting people on, you know, on the process or the protocol of the Uniform Code of Military Justice when, in essence, what he is a whistleblower. I mean, in essence, that's what he is, right? I mean, he's blowing the whistle and making demands. And I don't think it's wrong for someone in his position to make demands. He knew he was emotionally, physically relationally tied to someone who lost their life in the suicide bombing that took 12 service members' life, right? And countless others, right? But he was directly tied to those people, and he said, look, we're demanding answers. How could this happen? You know, to the point that you brought up earlier, right? We had Dan Frank on the show, and he said it's not like we were doing something that we haven't done time and time again in the history of our military. We know how to exit. We know what to expect. We know the protocol. We know the way to walk us towards getting out of there in a safe and effective and efficient way, and that was not done at all. It's like the manual on how to do it was literally thrown to the wind to cause as much chaos and controversy as possible, when allegedly the whole reason that we didn't want to have a plan in the first place is because of the optics.
And this is why people are starting to disobey.
Right. And you have to ask, like, you know, at what point is it okay to disobey, right?
Well, when you're in the United States military, it's never okay to disobey.
Right.
But man, I'm just happy to know that there was at least a service member who felt the need to stand up and say something and really put it all on the line like that. I think that there's a likelihood that that if we end up kind of taking the country back, and I know that that's radical language to use, but if that does happen, I think people like, what is it, Lieutenant Zeller?
Stuart Scheller, yep.
Stuart Scheller. I think he'll go down as a hero.
I would hope so. I mean,
I hope
obviously
so as well.
History's written by the victors, but you would hope that.
And there are a lot of whistleblowers that probably deserve to go down as heroes.
Right.
That are currently being viewed as enemies of the state.
Right.
It's like if you are shining a light on corruption, the country should be backing you. Nobody should be cheering for corruption. Nobody should be cheering for crony capitalism. Nobody should be cheering for dirty money making its way into politics and, you know, people taking advantage of power and being corrupt. Nobody should be cheering over that. But through politics and through the arm of the mainstream media on the left and the right, people end up just buying it.
Right.
Because they want to be sympathetic to whatever side they feel
politically, tied to or whatever.
I mean, it's just a way for people to fall into being manipulated and really not having their own original thoughts. And I feel like now more than... So I don't think our population knew what to do when the TV was invented.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, media is like super easy to consume. And it's gotten to a point now where people are starting to understand that the truth is out there.
Right.
Among all of the propaganda that we're being fed. And a lot of people are just flat out unplugging.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, there's those that are simply unplugging, and then there are those who are saying, you know what, as much as I'm being told that this is fake news or whatever else, like, you know, these boots on the ground initiatives, even shows like ours, right? And we would never puff ourselves up, you know, that's not the point of what we're trying to do here, but we try to be reasonable, we try to be rational, we try to be critical thinkers, right? Even though we have our own perceptions and our own agendas. We try to be fair. We try to just say, look, dude, there's more than meets the eye. There's more than what you're being told. So at minimum, do your own research. At minimum, be critical thinkers, right? And that's why we bring a lot of this stuff up. Not because we're trying to persuade you towards one side or the other, but we're trying to tell a story that we personally don't feel is being told. I don't. You know, when we look at what happened in the aftermath of the audit in Arizona, we would be led to believe, based on, you know, what we heard from mainstream media, that all that came out of that is that Joe Biden got more votes than Donald Trump thought he did in the first place.
Yeah, they
like,
play games with words. It's sloganeering, and they only tell the part of the story that suits them. And there's no story that gets published, good or bad, that doesn't benefit them in some way.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And in this way as well, right? Like, what do we have in reality? We have a botched exit from a 20-year war in Afghanistan where many promises were made to a people of that country that if they put their trust and their hope and their faith in the Americans that were coming in to invade their country, that it would be worthwhile to them in the end. And what we have is the same organization that was in charge of that country back in 2001 is also the same organization that is now in charge as well. And not only that, but they have a vendetta. And only that, like this is the part that I can't wrap my head around. Not only that, but the Taliban literally said, hey, America, like, we're a little bit worried about how this exit's going. Would you guys be willing to stick around for a little bit longer, and we'll give you Kabul? Like, we'll give that to you for, an extended period of time so that we can make a smooth transition, because we're not really ready. We've been fighting and blowing things up and doing suicide bombs and killing people and, chasing down, resistors or whatever. We're not really ready to run the country yet. Would you help us out? And Biden's like, nope, we're getting out. We're out. Yeah. You're on your own.
It is still
and
my personal conviction
we're going to blame Donald Trump. And
that we shouldn't have been there.
I don't disagree.
That's my personal conviction.
I don't disagree. I mean, I like the idea of going in and getting rid of, the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and, holding people accountable for what happened on September 11th. But to me, the more I've understood over the last 10 plus years, this was we couldn't win. If you've watched any documentaries of those who have been on the ground and seen, the Marines' efforts to try and train up police and realize just by nature these are some corrupt individuals and they're very tribal.
Different countries and people groups.
With very different objectives. Like to some people you can dangle freedom in front of them and it's an enticing thing that's going to let them, strive for something better. Yeah. And for others it's just like, dude, pay me $50 and you'll get whatever you need. Like I just need to feed my family tonight.
Look at Vietnam, right? We went there and we were like, oh, we're going to bring them freedom. And then the farmers who we thought were being oppressed were fighting. They were putting their lives on the line. They were fighting the American military, and I don't want to say they won, but they at least got us to be like, whoa, like we bit off a lot more than we could chew here. And these were the people that were quote unquote being oppressed.
Right.
And I do have a personal connection to somebody whose family comes from Vietnam. They fled to America because of the war, and they personally feel like America didn't finish the job, and they're they're happy to be in America right now.
It was definitely political for sure.
But I think America needs to stop playing the game of trying to go around the world and setting these people free. It's like different countries exist for a reason. They all have different political platforms. They all have different political systems. And I think it's kind of arrogant for us to say, you need to do things the way that we're doing it. If people want that, then they'll figure out a way to leave, usually as refugees or something like that. But a lot of people do like being part of like socialism. A lot of people like being part of communism.
And you can have it there. And not only that, but like when you add a zealous religion into the mix as well, right? Like in certain ways, what America did for Iran in Iraq and other places, right, is the dirty work, right?
Yeah.
They could come in the aftermath, not only use propaganda because of the botched, we just blew up 10 civilians that had nothing to do with Taliban or Al-Qaeda. And what do you think? You got 100 people that are now angry at America, and Iran can come in and say, look, dude, those are the bad guys. We're going to radicalize you, which is what they're trying to do anyway. They just didn't have the political influence or power or monetary means to do it. And so, again, this isn't a conversation about, was the war correct? Really what we're trying to get at now is that there is a time to disobey. And what Lieutenant Colonel Scheller did was disobey. He knew exactly what he was doing. He contemplated even posting it like in the middle of his 4-minute and 45-second video, that was going to cost him his 17-year career, was going to cost him his retirement, was going to cost him his future. He also had business interests because he was an entrepreneur and an inventor and created something that was being sold in military exchanges across the world. Like, it cost him everything.
Right.
And yet he still went ahead and did it because for him, his convictions to do the right thing were more important than his comfort, were more important than his prosperity, were more important than status quo and just towing the line so that, he could get his. Like,
right.
It was something bigger than himself, and he put himself out there, and now he's in jail. And I would tell any of our listeners who care, who understand what it costs this guy to do the right thing, to write your senator, to write your congressman, and demand that not only he be set free, but that his message to hold those accountable who made these atrocious decisions that cost lives to answer. Hold them accountable like they would hold us accountable for any decisions that we made that cost people's lives. It's not like accountability is only for the plebs. And I know I continue to say that, but I'm trying to say we got a class warfare going on here.
Yeah.
There is the haves and the have-nots. There's the people and those that are in charge of the people. And we need to hold our leadership accountable. And at a certain point, we need to ask ourselves, when is it okay to disobey?
That's a great question. And I think that we have a lot of really good things to talk about in the next segment. So
we do.
For the sake of time, because I know that we've probably gone a little bit long on the front end of this, I just want to say really quick, I know that lately we've been talking a lot about like politics and current events. Most of it is just kind of because things keep happening rapidly. But I do want to make sure that we start to focus more on maybe putting the weightier segments of our podcasts on bringing it back to the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what we have for the second segment here.
Absolutely. So after a short commercial break, we're going to jump right into that, Mike. If you're convinced that vaccination mandates from a government with a sketchy and unethical past are morally good, but believe biblical mandates from a holy and perfect triune God are morally wrong, it may be time to get off social media and tune in to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. Hello, Pilgrims. This is Jason from the Pugnacious Pilgrim, reminding you that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So, if you're looking for truth that doesn't change based on the winds of culture, we invite you to join us every week for the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast, where we take a look at the world from a Christian's point of view. We won't pretend to have all the answers, but we do promise to do our best at discerning truth from error and having some fun along the way. So, if you're looking for something different than you've already found so far, we encourage you to give us a try. And if you like what you hear, do us a favor and tell your friends. For more information about the Pugnacious Pilgrim, check out our website at www.pugnaciousPilgrim.com. Thanks again, Pilgrims, and stay pugnacious.
I love listening to you talk, Jason. Oh, yeah. You've got a great voice.
I appreciate that, man. I've never been told that before.
My dad actually listened to a bunch of our podcasts, and he said the same thing.
Okay. Was that good or bad? How did that conversation go?
I bet he's listening to this one.
Oh, cool.
So, Dad, I just want to say hi. Yeah, he and I had a conversation. I had initially asked him not to listen to the podcast just because he and I have a lot of differing political opinions, and he found it, and he listened to it, and he actually has enjoyed our perspective on a lot of things. So maybe I was wrong in instructing him, or I guess pleading with him not to listen to it, because I know that he and I have a lot of heated discussions, but he had a lot of really nice things to say. So it really, it kind of convicted me a little bit in assuming that he'd be upset about it, and he really wasn't. So, but one of the things he said is that you have a very pleasant voice, Jason.
Well, that was super nice of him.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I'm taking from what you just shared that actually warms my heart even more than his maybe affirmation on my voice, is just the fact that maybe someone who we don't line up with politically is still able to listen to us and hopefully understand that we're trying our best to take this from a rational, reasonable point of view. Now, I'm sure
it's just convicting for me because I know I say a lot of things intentionally to poke the bear, and sometimes my dad is the bear that's getting poked. And Dad, again, if you're listening, I love you. I'm really glad that we can disagree with each other and still remain civil. He and I are both very passionate people.
Yeah.
So when we get into these political discussions, sometimes I know if you're a fly on the wall, you'd be like, wow, these two guys are really mad at each other. And it's like, no, we're really not. We're just very passionate about this stuff.
And we should be, right? I mean, regardless what side of the aisle you fall on, this is a time to be passionate, right? I mean,
100%.
I mean, we're at a precipice, we're at a crossroads. And, I know that some people just love the idea that they can kind of be uninvolved. But I think the time to be uninvolved, the time to be naive, the time to be ignorant about what's going on it's not now. And so I think people need to really understand, what are my convictions and what am I willing to do about that, right? And as it pertains to this topic specifically, Mike, the idea is, when is it okay to disobey, right? Like, we know that the Bible tells us specifically, and again, we're primarily a Christian worldview podcast, right? That's what we proclaim to be, looking at the world and world events from a Christian point of view. We know the Bible tells us, submit to the authorities that God has placed over us, right?
Yeah.
But what does that mean? And at what point do we really need to consider, it's morally right for me to disobey?
Yeah. It requires discernment. It requires a healthy knowledge of Scripture. It requires a healthy knowledge of the character of Jesus. It requires a healthy knowledge of really kind of the juxtaposition between humanly politics and godly principles.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're always going to find ourselves opposed to human things.
Right.
When we're following the Lord.
Yep.
Always. So, and I'm intentionally transitioning into this just because I see you have this, but so that leads a lot of people to try and constantly figure out what's the best political system?
Right.
Who are we opposing? Why are we opposing them? Why are we even put in a position where we have to oppose tyrannical leaders? And I think that's a discussion worth having.
Yeah.
So really the conversation we wanted to get into really quickly is whether or not anarchy would be an answer. I think that we could have chosen anything for this segment. We're specifically choosing anarchy because we had a very, I think, good, thought-provoking, informative, and really a peaceful conversation with a good friend of ours about whether or not anarchy would be a legitimate answer for the struggles that we're finding as Christians, trying to line up with a democracy or capitalism or whatever it is that we're subjecting ourselves to. And his argument is that anarchy may be the answer.
Right. And I think one thing just right out of the gate, right? The word anarchy has a lot of different connotations to a lot of different people, right? And I think a lot of times that's where we fall on these things is you throw out the buzzword socialism or capitalism or statism or anarchy or whatever, and it ruffles feathers, right? People's heckles go up, but they don't necessarily really understand what's being said. And so, half of the conversation was really trying to sort out, what do you mean by that, right?
Anarchy is so appealing to me, just on a guttural level. I just
on pure punk principle.
I just want people to leave me the heck alone.
Yeah,
I want to be able to do what I want to do.
Well, and it's different. It's different than libertarianism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so if you were to try and describe in your own words, and that's what I'm asking, right? Layman terms here. What is anarchy to you, Mike?
Man, it's so conceptual. I haven't spent nearly as much time as our friend Dan.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how anarchy would actually happen. The only way that I could say it is that everybody's responsible for themselves. Now that sounds like libertarianism. I guess I don't really know the differences between libertarianism and anarchy, other than libertarianism seems to be a little bit more organized than anarchists are. Anarchists believe that that things will kind of take care of themselves as a utility of whatever the issue is. You know, if people decide something's wrong, they're going to take care of it, right? But it seems like most anarchists are anti-violence. They're physical persuasion. They're anti-force being used to enforce anything.
Yeah, and really, when it, my understanding along those same lines is that it's a society being freely, able to live its life without there being a governing body. And so, you may have sects, you may have, communes, you may have all these different organizations within anarchy, but there isn't some overarching system or government or I shouldn't say laws, right? Because I think each of these little sects could have their laws, but there isn't like any ability or power structure to tyrannize or whatever the right word, right? Like you can't have tyranny in anarchy, allegedly, right? In its utopia form.
Yeah, and that's I think that's where we were kind of disagreeing with our friend Dan. And I suppose you were kind of disagreeing with him more than I was. Thinking about all this stuff gets to be so circular for me. It really does, because I'm like, man, it would be really awesome if I could just be a part of like an anarchist commune where everybody just kind of was able to do whatever they want. And then it turns into like, okay, so am I a proponent of communism? And then I'm like, no, I'm not really a proponent of communism. There'd have to be rules. And then it's like, okay, well, if there's rules, then who has to be the enforcer of those rules?
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, then there would need to be a leader. Well, if there is a leader, then like what kind of lead? So you end up just kind of going in circles. And there's no such thing as utopia.
Right. And we all want it, right? In a socialist utopia, like on paper, dude, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, and we've even talked about this on the show, right?
Idealism is attractive. Right. It's just unrealistic.
Right. And what makes it unrealistic? Like that's the part of this whole thing, really, especially from a Christian worldview perspective, that I think is missed a lot of times. And it doesn't matter if you're talking anarchy or communism or socialism or whatever. Like the element that always makes the system break down, whatever it is, at least for me, when I analyze it, is not the system itself, but the fact that you have flawed, sinful people in the mix.
Yep, it's the fall. It's the depravity of man. You can have the absolute perfect system. I mean, I think Christianity. I think that if you follow the moral teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, that's perfect. The problem is you'll never have that.
Right, and it's not because it's impossible for man to visualize or even lay out a practice that would allow that to happen. It's that you get men into the equation, right? And you get a scenario where Cain and Abel are both, they have everything that they ever want, but there's jealousy in the mix, there's pride in the mix, there's envy in the mix, there's all these things that are in the mix because of man's sinful nature, the fall of man, that end up turning this thing inside out.
Like in an anarchist society, how do you deal with somebody who stole from his neighbor?
Right.
How do you deal with somebody who's like a sexual vagrant?
Right.
How do you deal with those things in an anarchist society? Somebody has to be in authority enough to determine what a punishment would be for somebody who committed a crime.
Right. And this actually, believe it or not, one of the things that I was thinking on the airplane when we were having this conversation with our friend Dan is that, I saw this play out. The kids and I went to the Boston Common, and, there's a lot of history in the Boston Common. It was a place where, people used to bring their cows to graze in the field and just kind of have their town hall discussions and get to know yous and all this other stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And our kids were there playing on a playground. But we started looking up the history, and the Puritans hung Quakers in trees in that very park because they refused to submit to the requirement to not practice their Quaker religion in a Puritan colony that had been established.
Yeah.
And even that, right? Like, I think about it in today's world, and I've got friends who have Quaker history that love Jesus and acknowledge his supremacy and put their faith and trust and hope in him as their salvation. And I have those that probably have, Puritan, background more than Quaker, right? And in today's world, with our understanding and love for one another and the idea of the church being one, we can live together in harmony. But 200, 300 years ago or whatever, like, people are hanging from the trees in the place where my kids were playing on a playground because of their religious denomination preference. That, like, the Puritan colony was established out of England. They came over here with basically utopia on their mind. They signed the Mayflower Compact. They had all these rules and were basically living into the freedom that God had given them. And even in that utopia, which started the very foundation of what is today America, came with sin and depravity and issues with discernment that led to, whether it's the Blair Witch trials or, people hanging from trees in the Boston Common.
Salem.
Well,
Salem
yeah.
trial.
What did I say?
Blair Witch.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what we're drinking tonight, but there was the Blair Witch thing too.
That was awesome.
That was definitely.
That was actually an awesome thing for you to say. No, but I totally agree with you, and this is just, again, further evidence of the fall of man. Like, even when everything is perfect, we're gonna figure out a way to make it imperfect.
Yeah.
We're gonna figure out something to be upset about. People talk about America being the land of the free all the time.
Yeah.
No, we're not, because we're really not free from the criticism of our neighbors.
Yeah.
And we never will be.
Right.
And that's by design.
Yeah.
But we'll never have utopia as
Right.
long as our neighbors are able to criticize us for our decisions.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think, purely what a lot of people want, really, I guess they're extremists nowadays, but they want to be left alone.
Yeah.
They want to have the freedom to do what they want to do and be left alone in it. And I don't think that we've ever really had that in America.
Yeah, I think probably when people expanded westward or whatever, but they very rarely traveled alone. And what we can acknowledge even from the history that is accounted for in God's word is that a family unit, which should have been the closest of all units possible, right? Cain killed his brother Abel for the simple idea that God found favor on him and didn't, God found favor on, he was jealous. He was envious of his brother. And even God tried to capture him before that and say, look, it's not about the slaughter. It's not about what you're bringing. It's how you're bringing it to me, And so even then what you see is that it's a relational piece between man and his God more before it was ever really about man and his fellow man.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gets lost a lot of times in these ideas, right? They're very, very idealistic, like you said, right? That's the whole point. Like, can't we make this world better? We crave for better. We crave for Eden. That's what we crave. And we've been craving for Eden since we fell from Eden.
Right. Certainly aspects of Eden resembled anarchy.
Yeah. For sure.
The way a lot of idealists see anarchy. But really, was it anarchy? Who was in charge?
Right. It wasn't anarchy.
Right.
And that's kind of what we tried to get at with our buddy Dan. And I don't in that regard, I don't actually think we were that far off.
No, we're not
I
at
know
all.
he would
No.
acknowledge 100%.
Yeah.
But the point we were trying to make is that, and again, maybe my language isn't accurate here, but this is the best that I could come up with to describe it, is that God is a benevolent dictator. God has demands for the world. God has demands for those whom he created. He told us what his expectations of us are, and he holds us to that. And we also acknowledge that the wages of sin is death. So he's in that regard, you do what God says or you will go to hell. Yep. Like that is, it's tyrannical in the sense that it's punitive, but it's not tyrannical in the sense that God is good. He's benevolent.
Right.
He's, so I mean, the
Right.
word
Tyranny,
doesn't do justice. I just don't know how to, he's maybe a dictator, right? He's a benevolent, he's benevolent. He's good. Every action that he requires of us has a direct connection to something awesome, holy, good, righteous.
We can't conflate God's reign with the reign of any man.
No, absolutely not. And
So-
that's why words don't do justice.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to make a comparison that would be, it's not like God says, do whatever you want. Have fun, have it your way, enjoy life.
Well,
and whichever way it goes, so be it.
That's like, so I made a comment on this Facebook thread that theocratic fascism would really be the answer. And really, my heart behind that is like, if we put God in charge and we made God in charge, right? We wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we have. And you know what? God is a God of consequence, a God of wrath. He's also a God of grace and
God
mercy.
is judgmental, is he not?
God is judgmental. And we should work on those
We
shirts.
need
We were
to.
thinking about doing
We
shirts
need
that just
to.
say God is judgmental
Yes.
on them. He is the judge. He is the perfect judge. And it's like, I would not be opposed. Like if Jesus was alive on earth today and he was in a position to be a dictator, I would vote for him.
Yes.
Who wouldn't?
Right.
Especially
if you truly believe, and this is the point, right? Even Adam and Eve, they had to ask these questions, right? Is God good?
Yeah.
Is God sufficient? And do I submit to him, right? Like those are, and if you could ask those questions and then answer them according to what you know to be absolutely true about God, you would absolutely vote for God, even if it meant like, God, you get to be the king. You call the shots. I want you calling the shots, because when I call the shots, I know what happens, right?
Right.
And so man's desire for self-rule actually is what led to the fall of man. God had already given man everything we could ever desire, everything we could ever hope for, everything we could ever need, but he also said, you can also choose your own way. You can also choose to disobey and have it your own way.
Yeah.
And it was our desire, and I say Adam and Eve's desire for self-rule, the enticement and the temptation to be God that actually led to the fall of man, that led to the depravity and the reality that on this side of heaven we will never have Eden again. We can't.
And that's why I teeter between like idealism and like realism, right? Realism and understanding total depravity. Like the idealistic solution would be to go start a commune.
Right.
Among Christians, right? It would be like heaven on earth, right? Like if you're trying to make earth more like heaven, that's a great way to do it, is get a bunch of Christians together and live life together. Although you're not going to be free from sin.
Right.
It's still going to be there.
Yep.
It's still going to be something that you're frequently going to have to repent of, and have mercy and grace and all that. But we can't ignore the fact that God specifically is using the folks that have repented and turned towards Christ to go and make disciples.
Right.
We have a job to do.
Yeah.
And we can't
bail from that.
If we're a light on the hill and there's no darkness, then the light doesn't shine.
Right.
Like we're called to shine. And that's why God has placed us where we've been placed. God has put us on an earth among the depraved so that we can be a light and shine and bring people to know the Lord. If you go out and try to create some sort of like idealist utopian commune that's anarchist or whatever political system you want to talk about, you are not being faithful in going and making disciples.
Yeah, the commission, the great commission that God has given us, right? It serves the world. And this is, this is part of what I always have to circle back to, right? Because I'm compelled towards those things too, right? Like it would just be so nice. It would just be so nice, right? But we saw, it's not like we don't have any examples of that trying to play itself out in the history of the world, right? Like literally what I just went to see in Boston was one concept of a people group who came to America for basically that very reason. And they had the ability, with limited connection to the kingdom, right? They had the ability to live into their ideals. They had the ability to establish their own government, in a sense, even though they still answered to the king. They were free to live as they pleased in their own colony. And from that, there was still depravity.
Right.
You know, and hardship and blame and resentment and bitterness, right? And, you know, I think that the thing Christians need to understand, especially for those who have put their faith, trust, and hope in Jesus for their freedom, and acknowledge that in some ways Jesus actually does save us from the American dream, because we don't have to pursue happiness.
Yeah.
He is our joy. He is our happiness.
Yeah.
But there was a blog post by Doug Wilson this week that was titled "On Humming a Mighty Fortress Through Your Masks." And here he reiterated the point that we've talked about, but he said the liberty of believers is fundamentally a gospel liberty. We have been liberated through Christ from guilt, from wrath, and from the curse of the law. We have been delivered from Satan, from death, from damnation. Christian liberty is therefore a bottom freedom from the reign of self and pride. Not only is it a freedom from those toxic things, it also is a freedom to something else. It is to be ushered into free access to God, along with the new ability to obey Him. Believers in the Old Testament had this kind of liberty also, but we have been given it to a much greater measure. All of this and more is found in the Westminster Confession of Faith 20.1. And then he goes on to say, when it comes to matters of faith and worship, God alone is Lord of the conscience and has left the believing conscience free of the doctrines and commandments of men. Consequently, to believe such doctrines and to obey such commandments of men is to betray genuine liberty of conscience. In addition, to require of people an implicit faith in the authorities with regard to their faith and worship is to destroy liberty of conscience and reason along with it. In addition, any requirement of an absolute and blind obedience is to do the same kind of destructive work. That's written in not only the Westminster Confession of Faith, but the Bible, right? Like, there's no law of man that can do any favors towards the Christian that the gospel and liberty and law of God has not already given to us.
Right.
And yet, what are we willing to sacrifice, right? And that's the question that we really ask, Mike, is when is it okay to disobey, right? And the reality, at least what I'm kind of understanding, you know, whether it be a trip to Boston or what we have already discussed for weeks and weeks and weeks in this whole ordeal since, you know, our new president took office, is, you know what, when we're being led like sheep to the slaughter, when we're being led down this path of hope and peace, and if we just do the things that the government tells us, and I know you had some fun with it this week on Facebook, but that's true, right? Like if Biden, I almost said Biden, and there's some truth to that even, right? That misspeak, but if Biden is offering us freedom, if we just do things his way, it's not freedom.
It's not freedom. He's even admitted it's not about freedom.
Right. It's not about freedom.
Yeah.
That was his own words.
And the fun I was having on Facebook, just for those listening, is like I posted a couple things. They were like obviously not real quotes, but they were like quotes from
probably
satirical quotes from Joe Biden, saying stuff like, "We really want to empower our citizens to make their own decision to follow my orders."
Yeah, and any freedom, any hope, any prosperity that comes with something that takes you away from what God has given to you naturally, right? And part of what our forefathers told us that God gave us innately to every man, right, was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are ours. They're ours because God gave them to us. They are not ours because the government provides them to us. So if the government is trying to tell us, if you just do this stuff, then you can have these inalienable rights, like, that is a time to disobey.
Yeah. And the argument that I've received in response to what you just said is, okay, well then do you think it's appropriate for the government to enforce any laws?
And what's your answer to that?
I think so. You know, here's the problem as a Christian, is knowing that when you put things up to vote,
right,
you're likely not going to get the Christian result.
Yeah.
In today's day and age. Maybe in yesterday's day and age, you were getting a lot of Christians that were voting on principle and voting based on faith and voting trying to be in line with biblical teachings. But you're not getting that today. And I think it's pretty clear in Scripture that when you are being asked to do something that is biblically immoral, you are allowed to disobey.
Right. And I think that becomes clear-cut when it's something like Daniel, right? Worshiping, bowing down, and worshiping another god other than God. Like, that's pretty cut and dry, right? And so that's why he could open his windows wide open and still worship God with all conviction and authority, right? Because he's not going to bow down. Just like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're not going to do it, right?
Yeah.
This isn't about us not trying to honor those who are in a position of authority over us. This is just us understanding that there's a greater authority that we answer to.
Yes. I think in a way, though, what we're being asked to do by the United States government is akin to worshiping a false god. And I know that sounds very sensationalistic, but what the government has currently done is they've made an idol out of medicine.
Yep.
Out of specific
Science,
medicine.
Vaccine.
And they're telling us that we have to submit to that authority of medicine instead of submitting to the authority of the Lord. And I will not hold medicine or the government as an idol before the Lord.
Right.
And there's no amount of threats, there's no amount of force that's going to get me to do that stuff. I'm flat out not going to comply. I'm not going to. There's nothing that they can do to make me follow orders to go against my convictions.
Right, your conscience and your convictions. And I think that's what's important, right? It was important for Lieutenant Colonel Scheller, and it's important for us pilgrims to sit there and understand, what do we stand for?
Yeah.
And of our convictions, what are we willing to lose in order to stand firm on our convictions? For the forefathers, for those citizens of Boston, in times past, who stood up for what was right, even when they knew it was going to cost them everything, it was right for them to disobey. It was okay for them to disobey, and again, we're not here to promote one method of disobedience over any others. That's not the point, right? Like, it probably wouldn't have the same effect if we went and tried to dump cargo from a ship into the ocean. I mean, the distribution lines are messed up enough as it is right now. The point is, though, stand firm on your convictions. Stand up for what you know is good, right, honorable, and do it without hesitation. Do it with conviction. Do it with joy and worship in your hearts, and honor Jesus, whatever that looks like. Honoring Jesus is the most important thing that we can do. And sometimes that means even standing with those with different convictions than our own, because we want to honor the fact that they have the freedom to live into those convictions. There's people losing their job, Mike, because they're standing firm on, not having something mandated to put into their body. As Christians, are we willing to honor those people? As Christians, are we willing to acknowledge their struggle and acknowledge their challenge and acknowledge their burden and carry it with them? I hope so. And that means, vaccinated or not, still being able to stand up and say, look, we stand with you, we support you, because God has given you this right, this freedom, and this cause. And that cannot be, like, to your point, right? Like, the freedom that we have in America is not our idol, right? And for some people, that's what it's become.
Mm-hmm.
What is our God is God and God alone. What is our God is, and what is our freedom is the freedom and liberty that we get because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But don't throw all other freedoms away without acknowledging who gave them to you. America, in its founding documents, understood where those freedoms came from. And the point is, honor Jesus by honoring those freedoms and honoring the people who are fighting for those freedoms at all costs.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with a post I had today. It was my shower thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? And my shower thoughts, just to paraphrase, were that, often Scripture is presented to us almost like connect the dots picture, but the dots don't have any numbers next to them. So what we tend to do as humans is we tend to try and make a picture out of it that is pleasing to us, right? And my plea to everybody, including myself, is don't try to create a picture that is pleasing to you. Try to honestly read the Scriptures and find out the picture that God has painted. Find out the picture that is pleasing to God and test your heart against that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reality, right?
Yeah. Don't let idols come before that.
Yep.
And even for you and I, Jason, I mean, we are at risk of holding idols before God in talking about politics and talking about freedom and talking about America. Patriotism can become an idol. We need to be careful, and we need to hold fast to our convictions in the Lord and let the Lord be number one.
Yep. And
let our faith be number one, and understand that Scripture is sufficient. We have answers in Scripture.
Amen. And that's what this is about, and again, the conversation kind of fell on our laps just based on timing, based on where I spent the last week, based on even conversations that we had this week and things that burbled up, this week in the news, and again, we're not calling people to rebel. We're just calling people to really think about what they would rebel for, and maybe now is the time. For us, obviously, the more that we see that's happening, I mean, that's coming up. Like we're being forced, even in our own positions of employment and stuff like that, to make a decision and to stand firm on our convictions or be pushed around. And
right.
You're probably in similar circumstances, either yourself or people that you know. And so the point is, at certain times it is okay to disobey, and now just might be that time. So God bless you, Pilgrims. We love you. Mike, would you give us a shout out?
Until next time, remember that there's a perishing world out there. So do your part to ensure that they're hearing the truth. God bless you, Pilgrims. Stay pugnacious.